I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Hi, everyone. I wanted to say a huge thank you for your understanding here at the top. I have had some heart issues since I was born, and I've been dealing with them a lot lately. Long story short, I was preeclamptic with my son. If you don't know what that is, it does mess with your heart rate and your blood pressure and things like that. And I ended up in the ER twice in the past week, and one of those times was with my 7-month-old baby in tow. So trust me, I would have much preferred being here in the studio creating the news du jour for you guys than where I was. And yeah, I really appreciate your patience. So anywho, I'm going to attempt to catch you guys up. There is a lot to go over, and with that in mind, I went ahead and consolidated a bunch of mini stories here at the top that we can kind of run through quickly and then get into the meat with some longer stories. It may be a longer episode today, so buckle up as we catch up. For our first mini story, Germany announced that it would be sending 14 tanks to Ukraine. That is something that has been in the works for a while, with Germany kind of on the fence about it. But Biden made the first move and announced that the U.S. would be sending tanks, and Germany followed suit pretty quickly afterward. And the next step with our mini stories, reportedly, the Virginia school where a teacher was shot by a 6-year-old student was warned 3 separate times about that student having a gun with them. I think we're all realizing, as a collective community, that these types of warnings must be taken with the utmost seriousness, regardless of the surrounding circumstances. Just because the student was so young or outside of the typical demographic, that doesn't mean that this person is safe. And we always have to take these warnings as if it's the real deal. Next up in mini stories, there is word on the street that Marjorie Taylor Greene, the controversial congresswoman, is eyeing a VP spot next to President Trump for 2024. She has been endlessly loyal to the former president, and that's something he values above all else. So I'd say she has a pretty good shot. We'll definitely have to wait and see, and we'll keep you posted. Last up for mini stories today, I wanted to let you guys know that a pretty bad tornado struck Houston, Texas, leaving about 124,000 households and businesses without power. And there is yet another cold front / snowstorm headed for the Midwest this week. So I always feel like a broken record with these stories. It's kind of the same song and dance, but it's so important to keep up with what's going on. And essentially, the crazy weather is just continuing. And anywho, on to our first story today. We're kind of like backtracking to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump, but Trump is back on Facebook. So if you guys remembered, we covered this several times in the past, but Meta had suspended Trump's account temporarily. So they were always planning to revisit the issue later on down the line, and now that time has come. When he was barred from the platform, President Trump actually had the most followed account on Facebook. The former president's Twitter account was also recently reinstated right ahead of his 2024 presidential run. But Meta reminded the former president and all of us, that there still are limits to what can be said on their platform. We all have to be aware of rhetoric that can harm people, period. So to the extent that the former president can stick to the truth and avoid inflammatory remarks that could potentially be dangerous, he should be able to stay and post on Meta. Stay tuned. And next up for today, the Pence documents. It never ends, guys. It just keeps going. So now representatives from former Vice President Pence have come forward and said basically that they found classified documents at his home in Indiana as well. I think this was kind of in an effort. It sounds like it was in an effort to cross their T's, dot their I's. The former vice president hired some legal professionals to basically go through his home with a fine-tooth comb and see if there were any classified documents lingering there. And supposedly in a box left over from his time as vice president, that team uncovered a couple of, quote, small numbers of classified documents, end quote. The Justice Department has now added this to their list of things to investigate because Pence had said repeatedly that he did not have classified documents in his possession. I think this is obviously pointing to a broader issue, which is the handling of our nation's secrets. These are three men who are potentially planning presidential bids in 2024. One is already announced, and none of them were able to carefully guard our national secrets. Now, I do think there are differences, important differences to distinguish between some of them. Pence and Biden, what they did is very similar, whereas Trump's is different, is the outlier, I would say. First of all, Trump had thousands of documents in his possession, just boxes upon boxes. So many that he had to rent a storage locker for them. And not only that, but he was asked 4 months by the National Archives to return the documents, and they had conversations back and forth with his lawyers. So we know he knew he had them. We know he was taking pains to keep them. He refused to give them up. He gave them the runaround for so long that they finally had to issue a subpoena and go and forcibly take them. It got to that point. Whereas both Biden and Pence each only had a very small number, not even enough to fill a box, and they returned theirs as soon as they became aware of them, at least according to them. So I wanted to make those differences very clear as we are all headed to the ballot boxes in 2024, and we need to understand what went down in each instance. It remains to be seen whether President Obama's home will be searched or investigated in any way, but he was famously the only president who took his daily briefings digitally on an iPad, so it is less likely that he would physically have classified documents at his home. But if it turns out that he also has documents, I think it's pretty clear that the highest levels of government are just being extremely relaxed about such important matters. And it's our job as the American people to express that we're not okay with this and hold these leaders accountable. And next up, we're veering off into some celebrity news. So, Justin Bieber sells his music. At a time when several high-profile female artists are fighting tooth and nail to own their own masters, Justin Bieber has just reportedly sold all of his music. About 291 songs of his were sold for a grand total of $200 million. Rolling Stone said that this is the biggest deal of Bieber's generation. For reference, Justin Timberlake sold his masters for about $100 million, according to the Wall Street Journal. And Bruce Springsteen, though, quite a bit older, a little more prolific. He sold his masters for about $550 million, according to CNN Business. So you do have to ask yourself, why would someone so young not want to own his own music, to be able to perform it on stage and on tours and get all the royalties involved? Well, Justin was actually diagnosed with something called Ramsay-Hunt disease. This is a condition that is brought on by shingles, but it basically paralyzes half of your face, which would be totally scary. And what's crazy also is that if you guys remember, Hailey Bieber had a stroke somewhat recently and half her face was paralyzed during that incident. So I was kind of like, wait, what is in the water, you guys? Anywho, I guess it's just a strange coincidence, but Justin had to cancel all but 6 nights of his tour, his most recent tour, due to this condition. So he's just in no place to really be performing right now. So maybe it's likely he's going to continue to make his health a priority, and that's why he's choosing to sell his masters. Is he hanging up the towel for good? It's pretty unclear, but he has been very reclusive as of late, and we'll just have to wait and see if he's done for good or not. Like, the teenage girl in me is just screaming at the idea that Justin Bieber is never going to make music again. But we don't know that that's the case, obviously, but it's just kind of crazy because he's pretty young. Anywho, we have 2 cases of treason to discuss. A top FBI agent taking bribes from Russian oligarchs and Ukrainian officials being fired over corruption. Let's get into it. So in the first case, a senior FBI agent in New York was caught taking money from a Russian oligarch, a guy named Oleg, and this is obviously very illegal, especially for him being an FBI agent, and it likely amounts to some form of bribery and therefore treason, espionage, something along those lines. But this dude oversaw some of the most secret shit that the United States was doing in terms of counterintelligence. He actually oversaw the activity of Russian oligarchs and even Mr. Oleg specifically, who, as it turns out, has ties to Vladimir Putin, as most Russian oligarchs do. He has been charged with violating U.S. sanctions and aiding an oligarch. So will more serious charges be filed? It's definitely possible. I think, him losing these 2 cases would lead to that potentially. But Russia is now, not just reaching into American law enforcement, but to its absolute top levels, you guys. This agent was paid about $225,000 by Mr. Oleg, and his last name is Deripaska, but we'll just call him Oleg. I don't know about you guys, but doesn't $225,000 seem like not a lot of money to betray your country and put your very high powered job at risk? And just, I don't know. These oligarchs are worth hundreds of millions, if not billions in some cases, and this interaction with an FBI agent was set to make them even more money. So it's just kind of crazy. I mean, it feels horrible that anyone would betray our country at all, but to do it for so small an amount is even worse. It's like they genuinely don't care if they do it. Anyway, this agent pleaded not guilty in court, so he's intending to fight the case against him. So stay tuned for more on this potential double agent. Now, over in Ukraine, we have, some corruption issues to talk about. Several top government officials were fired on Tuesday, basically for a corruption scandal. This is the biggest any type of scandal since the war broke out. Russia is expert, at getting its long tentacles into people, but I actually don't think this sounds like it had anything to do with Russia. People just getting greedy. And anywho, there was zero public explanation for the firings. However, they were engulfed in rumors. things like officials overcharging for food during food shortages. You guys, like, can you imagine? And now Republicans in the US are calling for an audit of how US money is being spent over in Ukraine, which frankly makes a lot of sense. If you're going to donate money or invest it, you want to know how it's being used. But this scandal, it stands to threaten the infinite cash flow that's coming in from not just the US, but the Western nations as a whole. And if these funds are going to line the pockets of government leadership, then we can't help you. We're trying to help the front lines, and it's not going to be worth spending unless our dollars are doing that. And that is the news du jour. Today, I want to leave you guys with the quote, "They who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escape those who only dream by night." If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use to listen. A rate and review or shout out on social media would mean the world to us and help us be able to keep creating the news du jour. But the best way to support all of our work is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/sugarfreemedia. You can also follow us on social media under sugarfreemedia.co on Instagram and just sugarfreemedia, all one word, on TikTok. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from Oklahoma.